Thank you very much for agreeing to come onto the podcast today with me, Gabby. I hope you are keeping well. And would you do me a big favor and tell the audience or give the audience a brief description as to who you were and how you became interested in the topic that we're going to talk about today, which we're going to be digging into diet culture, which it's a bit ambiguous. Probably some people be like, "What the fuck is that?" But we're gonna by the end of this episode, they're gonna have a pretty good understanding as to what it is and how we can maybe
Yep,
navigate the fitness landscape with it.
absolutely. And thank you for having me. So my background is mixed. I started with my bachelor's in exercise science, and I got my doctorate studying human nutrition and metabolism with a focus on the gut microbiome. And this was I finished in uh, a decade ago before gut health was really as popular as it is now. And then I was an assistant professor for 4 years. So I taught exercise science and related topics, anatomy, nutrition, and whatnot. And after those 4 years, I ended up leaving higher ed and I went the route of entrepreneurship. So I had been working with Renaissance periodization for a year at that point, and I decided to work with them full time, coaching and traveling internationally to speak at events, and did that for about 4 years. And toward the end of those 4 years, I started to, mostly out of curiosity, learn much more about intuitive eating, disordered eating, and at the time I was more focused on, the effects of like macro tracking and intentional weight loss. In part also because I had also struggled with disordered eating. I was diagnosed when I was in college, and I was at a point in my life where I felt that the intentional weight loss and control and macro tracking was disruptive to my quality of life. And I was also seeing it in my clients. About a third of my clients were really exhibiting disordered eating patterns that had me concerned. And there was a lot of talk in the industry at that time. This was back in like 2019, 2018, about intuitive eating and weight neutral approaches. But those conversations often were very critical of intuitive eating and sort of, the associated movements, body acceptance and whatnot. And I just wanted to be able to engage in the conversations from a place of being informed and educated about the topics. Like, I am very much an empiricist. I need to see the data, I need to see the references. And as I read more and pursued additional certifications and coaching, that all came together really to inform me about the importance of being able to provide alternate approaches to macro tracking intentional weight loss in order to provide a truly client-centered approach aligned with best practices and my principles. And so I started to write about the realities of intuitive eating and weight neutral approaches. And I linked that to the now very normalized practice of autoregulation and using things like RPE or reps in reserve to make modifications to our training plans. And that expanded to a series of articles and a coaching framework. And that really laid the groundwork for the shifts that I made in my coaching practice over the now, last 5 years. So that's kind of how I got here. It was, pursuing curiosity and then also wanting to be aligned with my principles and values.
Yeah, it's quite a journey as well from like what you kind of started in the industry off with Go Health, which is the kind of Go Health
Mhm.
kind of early days. That was where I kind of initially gotten I kind of discovered your content, which is
Yeah.
it's a long, long time ago now. Um,
Yep.
but to kind of see like other kind of podcasts that you've done recently well as well, and the kind of similar topic that we're doing today, but then through like getting a lot more kind of in depth in regards to like the intuitive eating approach. And I guess intuitive
Mhm.
eating is something that you know a lot of people have probably heard of that, and I think there is
Mhm.
a kind of misconception that intuitive eating is just not tracking, which I think it is
Mhm.
something slightly different. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there are kind of two versions of intuitive eating. There's the more colloquial use where people mean, eating without tracking, kind of generally just, using more internal cues. But still, there's often an assumption that you should be hitting certain numbers or like the right macros. And some people think intuitive eating means just eating whatever you feel like, or, synonymous with emotional eating or eating just what you're craving. And those are misunderstandings of the actual intuitive eating, the term that was coined by the original dietitians who wrote the book, Tribbley and Resch, and also the term that's used in research. And intuitive eating really refers to an entire framework of self care that includes eating based on internal signals and an awareness of the nutritional qualities and function of food. But the steps that come before that are all about unlearning and dismantling the narratives that we have internalized from diet culture, from the industry that wants to perpetuate body dissatisfaction, and build a sense of self trust so that we feel safer and more comfortable responding to our internal cues and engaging in movement and other practices that support our health from a place of integrity to your values and an internally sourced sense of confidence and alignment with what you're doing, rather than the sort of classic approach of trying to avoid gaining fat, trying to control your body, and operating, engaging in a lot of the same behaviors, but from a place of body dissatisfaction and shame and guilt and anxiety.
I think it's a useful concept for people to get very familiar with, because of how, I guess, diet culture has always told people really that weight loss essentially is the kind of cure all for everything, right? It's like, if you want to improve hair health, weight loss. If you want to improve how you feel about your self confidence, weight loss. Whereas so many of the practices that essentially will kind of give you a lot of health benefits, and even benefits to do with your mindset and everything like that, they're not really related to just losing body fat. A lot of them are more behavioral things that we could do day to day, as you said, with the likes of an intuitive eating approach, where you are kind of paying attention to what is going on in your body, how you're feeling on that given day, honoring things like hunger, satiety cues, and I guess becoming a little bit more in tune with yourself, right? That's kind of the whole kind of the part of it. It's kind of the same thing of, if you are kind of gearing up for a powerlifting competition, for example, you kind of need to be hitting your kind of days of getting to the gym and doing your peaking protocol or whatever like that, right? But if you're somebody who's exercising because you want to exercise because it's part of your routine and you think it's important for your health and you like how it makes you feel, but on a given day you are trashed, you're feeling really down or whatever it is, that you've had a really stressful day at work, beating yourself up because you didn't go to the gym that day, that's not helpful. That would be an intuitive approach to say, today was a good day for me to take a rest day. I had this conversation with clients earlier as well. So it's, becoming a little bit more kind of understanding yourself better. I think that's what it's all about, right?
Yes, exactly. It's building self-awareness, and in that way, you are then able to better meet your needs. And then you build more trust with yourself. And it's this layering approach of, I really tuned in to my internal signals there, and I took into consideration the context of my external environment. I made a decision that led to an outcome that was more than just the short-term alleviation of anxiety. That actually helps me feel a lot better. I felt more rested, more energized. I ate a meal that was truly satisfying. I reached out to a friend, whatever it is. And then from there, you build more trust that you are going to be able to make the proper decision. And you don't need a set of macros to say, this is exactly what you need to be eating. And if you don't eat this, then you're eating the wrong amount. Or, you can never take a day off. Or you have to be, your smallest possible size. Those are the messages that we all often operate under. And then the things that we're doing feel exhausting. And we usually can't stick to them anyway. So, when you can either decide, I'm going to take some rest days because I feel totally beat up, or you can feel exhausted and then skip them, but feel guilty about it. The outcome is the same. It's just, you can help yourself feel better about the decisions that you're making when you know that they're really coming from a place of discernment.
Yeah, again, I think a really important distinction as well, because there's going to be people who listen to this podcast who do powerlifting, who do bodybuilding, and there's also going to be some people who don't have any competitive goals at all, and they're going to fall into the category of this type of behaviors is quite important for them to really kind of get a hang on, because following the behaviors of competitive powerlifters, competitive bodybuilders, it might lead them down the wrong path, and people at the upper echelons of bodybuilding just have a few screws loose in general. So you probably don't want to be copying those people all too much. Even though I
Yeah.
dabble in that myself. But I guess I think one kind of nice kind of move from this kind of part of the conversation is into, I guess, the kind of the diet culture side of things, right? Because I
Mhm.
guess intuitive eating has become more popular in the last few years because
Yeah.
it's kind of like it pushed back against what it has been like for like the last few decades, right? Where it's always
Mhm.
been something like the way you eat has to be almost tied to how you look or
Yep.
how you're performing. And I think, a lot of people are kind of like, not everybody's an aspiring athlete. You know, most
Right.
people just want to live a healthy life and, feel good about themselves day to day. So
Mhm.
I guess diet culture, as I said at the very start, ambiguous term, but
Mhm.
what does that like encompass? If you were to give me an example that you came across in like the last week, what would be an example of maybe toxic diet culture and maybe something that's even helpful?
Absolutely, yeah. So, diet culture, to just give it a definition, is a set of beliefs that moralizes behaviors around health, more specifically around our ideas of fitness and body image ideals. So, diet culture moralizes your eating and your exercise habits, it moralizes your body size, and it provides privilege to people who are in smaller bodies, who are in more fit bodies. And it stigmatizes individuals who are in larger bodies, who don't fit that ideal, or people who decide that they're not going to be um, very strict with things like external tracking of their weight and their macros. It also adds a sense of obligation and guilt and shame around these behaviors, including exercise, and uses exercise as a way to earn food or as a punishment for eating too much. That can look at a lot of different ways.
Mm,
There are also offshoots of diet culture that coincide with another sort of societal phenomenon called healthism, where we are constantly in pursuit of optimizing our health. Like we have to somehow be healthier. It's not okay to be potentially sick. We have to prevent illness at all costs. We have to avoid things that are impure, chemicals, man made. There are a lot of these sort of naturalistic logical fallacies that are woven into the set of beliefs. And so diet culture also comes with this sort of constant striving to
mm,
control the body and make it look a certain way. And so we can see this in a lot of fitness magazines. In most cases, the people that we see in fitness magazines are attractive by societal standards, are very fit. We don't see a lot of people in large bodies engaging in fitness activities. And when we do, they often receive a great deal of criticism. We see a lot of
mm,
weight stigma around individuals engaging in exercise. And sometimes, I mean, back in the early 2000s, we saw that that became a reality TV show with The Biggest Loser. And so they really make a farce of individuals in large bodies that are engaging in exercise, and it's to be seen as a punishment. We see that in the supplement industry. We look at things for gut health, that you are being sold a problem so that you'll buy their solution. They're telling you there's a problem with your body, there's a problem with your skin, there's a problem with your gut. And so you need to buy this supplement or buy this product to fix it. The worst thing you can be, especially as a woman, is old. And maybe the second thing, worst thing that you can be is fat. And so you have to buy all of these things and do all of these things to prevent that or delay that from happening. So we see that in the fitness industry, in the beauty industry, in the supplement industry, that we are supposed to be buying these things and we were supposed to be
mm.
doing everything we can in the interest of, optimizing our health and our physique. And anything contra to that, any alternative is often seen as being weak or lazy or ineffective.
It's historically, I think women have almost always got the worst end of the stick when it comes to this type of stuff, right? Because I guess in the early days it was always kind of like marketed like weight loss, the weight loss like powders, whether it was skinny
Mm-hmm.
teas, fucking putting
Yep.
lime in your water or cucumber in your water. What was the other ones like
Celery.
or like Or like, or girls shouldn't lift weights.
Hmm.
Girls shouldn't lift weights. You
Hmm.
just go in the stepper.
Yep.
Here's this female part of the gym that doesn't have any weights, or dumbbells go up to 10 kilos.
Hmm.
And I guess like now it's almost getting pushed opposite way. Females these days are too muscular. Like, they shouldn't be trained that hard. Like, it's like
Hmm.
what's the standard here? Like, what this pendulum's shifting back and forward, and I guess the on the male side, it's kind of like been a consistent rise from being still quite jacked to being almost like
Hmm.
now it's like what the fuck is going on? Like, people are
Yeah.
juicing out of their minds, and you see, and I
Hmm.
guess it's like very prevalent among early, like early lads in their 20s,
Yeah.
taking like SARMs and stuff like that, and then it's
Hmm.
become like the standard for young teens in general,
Hmm.
like population now, right? Whereas that didn't
Yeah.
exist as much when I was like kind of getting into gym. I knew that there was people who were taking drugs for sure, but
Hmm.
my idea of somebody on steroids was Ronnie Coleman. It
Right.
wasn't like
Yes.
it wasn't like men's physique athletes, or even like not even related to bodybuilding, but people who were
Hmm.
just flexing in the gym, like.
Yeah.
So I think it's really kind of evolved so much, like in like these last like 30-40 years or whatever like that, and
Hmm.
even longer. I know that's something that you've been kind of writing about in a book that you have
Yeah.
that's coming out. So, uh, like, how did these like standards like start, and like how did they progress to where they are now? Because they've changed so rapidly and they've changed so drastically.
Hmm.
It's like, how can we
Yes.
even define what is a beauty standard, or anything like that, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the goalposts are constantly moving. And it really started, I mean, there's a long history in the US, and that's primarily what I focused on in my book, starting back in the early 1900s. And there was this intersection of societal beliefs and values around what it meant to be a good citizen in the US, food propaganda related to World War One, food conservation, and the discovery of calories and calorie counting, not just by the nutrition science community, but by the general population. So what you had here was really the perfect combination of, um, you know, beliefs about very strict beliefs about how people should behave in order to be considered quality citizens, good people, and that it should look a certain way. So calorie counting became a way to control body size and to lose weight so that you could exhibit to other people that you had been doing your civic duty of conserving food and not eating too much. Because now people finally were able to connect food intake, energy balance, and body weight. And they had not been able to do that before. In the past, body standards really leaned more toward people in larger bodies because that was seen as a symbol of wealth and prosperity. You had, plenty of food to eat. You were very healthy. So that was the stage in the early 1900s. And so it became normal to diet. Like the first diet book was published in 1918. And it was all about, the very scientific, en vogue way of controlling your body weight through counting calories and eating, as little as possible. Moving forward a few decades into the Great Depression, dieting was a way to exhibit that you were above the suffering, above the want and need of the lower classes that were struggling with the economy, and that you could, in the same way that we go to the gym, like for fun, but people who are engaging in physical labor, like they are going to be really jacked, but it's because they're working. We go to the gym and that's our leisure activity. It's a sign of status. So that thin ideal was maintained through the Great Depression, even though historically speaking, it would have made more sense for it to go in the other direction to say, oh, well, people with more money are in larger bodies. No, that wasn't the case. And so dieting became very posh, but it really did start to transition more to being a woman's activity. It started more as a male activity, and dieting looked like, fasting and doing different things like in the interest of health. But when it started to focus more on body control, it really became more about what women should be doing to meet a specific beauty ideal. Because women not only have to control their body, they also are in a race against time. Because at this point in time, I mean, lifespans were shorter. And if you were a woman at 30 and you were not married with children, you were an old maid at that point. And so the one thing that you could do was to control your body size and create a sense of safety in that respect. Because while I'm attractive to people, I'm going to be treated better. I'm going to have more respect. Because at that point, having the smaller body meant you're disciplined, you're a hard worker, you're a good citizen, you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, you're making the right choices. Because now we understand that body size is just a matter of making the right choices. And that rhetoric, even though that's from, the 1940s and 1930s and earlier, is still here 100 years
Mhm.
later. And then when we went into the 60s and 70s, the 50s, 60s were a little bit quieter. That was like the government was putting out recommendations about, eating healthful diets to reduce the risk of heart disease. But then the 70s and 80s, that's really when we saw the formation of this diet industrial complex where now there is an industry. There's a huge group of people that want supplements, that want products to help them control their body size, especially women. In the 80s, we had Pumping Iron. That was the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that really brought bodybuilding out of just like the niche, subculture, and exposed other people to it, other gym enthusiasts. And so bodybuilding became much more popular. And then into the 90s and 2000s, you had a huge boom in weight loss products, in like Slim Fast and commercial weight loss groups like Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig. And then going into the 2000s, you now have the support of social media. And social media has created a a global, like viral sense of diet culture and has influenced body image ideals, because now beyond just social media, we also have advanced AI that can give people the perfect physique, and it's almost unrecognizable to some people that it's been so heavily modified. And so we're being exposed to physiques and to facial appearances that are not that have only been recently available to humankind, in the recent years. And so we have now this completely skewed sense of what's normal. What does a normal person look like, and how does a normal person eat? To the point that we have normalized disordered and harmful behaviors because it's seen as what's necessary to be able to achieve the optimal physique and optimal health, which is part of our civic duty. Because if we don't do those things, we're not productive members of society, we're not doing our part, and we're seen as a burden. And the people that don't conform to those standards are ostracized, in quiet ways and also in obvious ways. I mean, people say things out loud about people in large bodies.
I think probably one thing that seems to have been ignored for the last century, in as far as I can understand from what you mentioned, is those environmental factors that tend to affect people's
Mhm.
relationship with their food, the body, like their body, and their actions and behaviors. Like you mentioned there,
Mhm.
with people back in the day and who were working manual labor jobs, and as a result of working manual labor, they were fit and they're strong and they were muscular, and they're probably
Mhm.
probably not too, yeah, they probably couldn't put on body fat because they didn't have that much food to eat, right? Whereas
Right.
you have the people who are in the more kind of wealthier classes in society, they have the kind of bigger bodies because they can, but they can also choose to exercise. They can also choose to be healthy. They can choose to do all these stuff because they have the resources
Mhm.
available. Where
Mhm.
now, yeah, as you said, the exact same rhetoric is here, right? So is the
Mhm.
if you are like there's the one thing I hate is like people say your body is a reflection of like your ability to be disciplined or your willpower level, right? Or like somebody's
Mhm.
body is like a reflective of like how they kind of treat themselves and like how they respect
Mhm.
themselves.
Yeah.
And it's just so ignorant to like
Yep.
what goes on in people's lives. It's like the classic attribution error, right? So like we obviously attribute our like successes to all our kind of like ability to be disciplined and everything that we've been able to do ourselves, and discount the
Mhm.
effects of our upbringing, our environment, and all the opportunities that we've had. And then you see somebody
Right.
else who's in a bigger body, and you're like, they just don't try hard enough. They're just lazy, you
Mhm.
know.
Yep.
And it's really sad because that rhetoric is still here, and it seems like it's probably almost getting worse in America for that type of stuff now, and
Mhm.
the message is almost being pushed harder, as
Yeah.
if like we're gonna have a new set of guidelines that just come out that just say try harder, and people are going to solve the obesity crisis.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. There is that sense of an individual responsibility. And that is another aspect of healthism, that it creates and it moralizes health and the prevention of illness and creates this potential sick role where if you are seen as not striving for health constantly and not fitting a specific ideal, then you're just on your way to being a burden to society. And that, yeah, you're making the wrong decisions, you're not trying hard enough. And it shifts all of the responsibility to the individual. And the sort of like I think where it started was intended to be more empowering. Like, hey, we have the ability to make choices. We can make choices that influence our health and influence our body composition. And that is true. But it becomes oppressive when we ignore the fact that we can't control everything and that there is also a responsibility on the side of the government. There are also infrastructural elements that are going to make it harder for certain people to access the resources that they need to pursue health. And beyond that, there might be some people who decide not to pursue optimal health. And that is really hard for people to accept. It's like, even though it might not affect them in any way, shape, or form, they're worried that another person's decision to remain in a large body, to not exercise, is going to have a negative effect on them because the way that they view the healthcare system as being sort of a shared system, they feel like they're paying more because someone else isn't making the right decisions. If you notice, none of that addresses the people who created the system. None
Mhm.
of that addresses the incredible cost of accessing healthcare that is not due to the people that need to access healthcare, that is due to the system itself, that is due to the politicians and the administrators within the healthcare system. Now, that's unique to the United States, but that rhetoric, I think, because the US has such an influence on many other countries around the world, that sentiment still is present in other countries, even when the healthcare system might be different. But that is very much the case here, that there is an individual responsibility and a lack of acknowledging those external factors and a lack of calling for a better system that could better benefit everyone, and instead blaming the people who are not doing the things that you think they should be doing, and ignoring the obstacles they might be facing.
Yeah, I think that the rhetoric it transcends not just the fitness industry, it transcends lots of different areas
Mhm.
of society. Like it is very much the same in Ireland. Like you'd have the exact same thing. I guess like you could the kind of wealth and class structure does also kind of fit into the kind of diet side of things and health
Mhm.
side of things because it's very much they're all related, right? Um, but I guess the kind of common kind of thing there is like if somebody is struggling to make ends meet, it's just like why don't you just get a side hustle and just like start making money online?
Mhm.
It's like it's so easy.
Yes.
Here's my 5 step funnel for selling courses or something like that. You know,
Mhm.
it's like it's not that easy. Like if everybody was an entrepreneur, there'd be nobody in society to do the necessary jobs, right? So like
Yes.
there is but it is like that, like just pull up your bootstraps and just try harder. And like to a degree,
Mhm.
right, there is some value in having some like I guess like kind of figures in the industry who are like these motivational people, right? And they have this like
Mhm.
motivational message because it can empower some people to at least kind of like start. It can like just be that like
Mhm.
it can be like like the flint that lights the fire, right?
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily the thing that's going to sustain the change long term,
Mhm.
because this is
Yep.
where like kind of coaching people comes in, right? Like if every week a client turned up to their check-in and they just weren't succeeding, and I just said every week try harder, and then like on like the second or third week I just like you're just fucking useless, like you clearly don't want this, do you? And like you're wasting
Mhm.
my time. Do you think that's gonna make that person be like, I need to make this guy proud now? No, they're probably not. They're probably gonna
Mhm.
feel really, really bad about themselves, and
Yeah.
they're probably gonna stop checking in. They're probably discontinue the service, and they may
Mhm.
not ever go to another coach again or reach out for help because that was
Yeah.
such a bad experience. And that unfortunately does happen. Um,
Yeah.
but I think with more kind of messaging like this around, it is kind of starting to shift. Like coaches are becoming a little bit more
Mhm.
empathetic, or coaches themselves are starting to become a little bit more kind of emotionally aware,
Yeah.
and like see that change for these people who are struggling and probably have struggled for a long, long time.
Hmm.
It's not going to do them any favors if it's coming from a place of shame, and it has to almost, yeah, almost have to come back to, like, helping that person like develop some self-awareness, develop some
Yeah.
self-compassion, be okay with kind of making mistakes, making failures, and
Hmm.
nudging people just in the right direction. It's not about optimizing everything. It's about just like kind of tweaking small habits and behaviors over time that kind of gets the
Hmm.
person to make some headway towards where they want to be. If it's like 1%, like every month, like that's
Yeah.
more percent than they were making the previous month. So, I think again, and this also comes down to coaches' expectations. I
Hmm.
myself, I could beat in bodybuilding, I could beat in powerlifting. I have silly, insane like standards for my own behaviors, but if I impart them onto
Hmm.
my clients, it's not helpful.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And, I remember in 2020, 2021, having debate like conversations about the utility or lack thereof of shame in coaching and in behavior change. Because there is a misconception around the efficacy of shame in a group setting. Shame is sometimes used to suppress behaviors that are harmful to the entire group. And in some cases, that is effective in suppressing or hiding those behaviors, but it does not distinguish those behaviors. There are still people who abuse children, who abuse their partners, who commit crimes. They just don't do it out in the open because they know that it's not socially acceptable. Shame is not effective when it comes to actually changing behaviors. It just makes people feel bad about themselves. It makes them, and sometimes I will say, yes, people might start engaging in a new behavior out of a place of shame. But we don't want them to just engage in that behavior a few times. And we don't want them to engage in it from a place of shame long term either. So neither one of those outcomes is effective. What we want is for people to engage in behaviors from a place of self respect. So if we're using shame or we're encouraging self shame to try to get people to change, it's a very short sighted perception. And it's focused only on, oh, we just want them to change this behavior. Well, for how long and at what cost? And what are the long term effects going to be? And so it's still something that I think people enjoy to some extent, not everybody, but people kind of enjoy doing the how dare you, shaking their finger at someone who is enjoying their lives and feeling good about themselves with relatively less effort than the person who's shaking their finger. That person probably has a level of resentment, which is seated in jealousy. Because that person is striving so hard and they're thinking that they're doing all the right things to control their body size and look a certain way. Excuse me. And then they see a person in a large body who says, no, I actually feel I'm good with myself. Like, I'm taking care of my body and I'm okay that it's not the smallest body. It doesn't have to be. And that does seem to really make people angry, and that there's a sense of that person's breaking the rules.
Mm, yeah, and like as you said kind of earlier on, it's hard for some people to accept that not everybody's striving for like optimal health, because the
Mhm.
the the further you push in one direction for optimality, like the further you push away from everything else in in
Mhm.
in life, the further you push for optimal health, you might not that like optimal health doesn't mean like the leanest, most jacked body. Like
Yeah.
if that's your goal, then you're pushing kind of away from that, right? Because like
Mhm.
being extremely lean probably not great for your health long term, probably not great for your hormonal health, like just in regards to how they can play with your kind of mental health too as well, and like the body checking, like body image issues when you get to that like stage of leanness. Then even with the
Mhm.
likes of like level of muscularity, like they really need to be like pushing like well above like the kind of BMI kind of area with like carrying muscle mass into like your 50s, 60s, 70s. You don't need
Mhm.
that much muscle mass to kind of sustain kind of the activities you will need to be doing at that stage of life, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then as well, even just from the context of like what like life is meant to be more than just pursuits of health, right? It's meant to be more than just
Mhm.
optimizing your micronutrients, like from the for the context of food. And this is, I guess, the some of the messaging that you do see online is like, okay, when it does come to food, we're gonna follow this seed oil free diet, or we're going to follow a carnivore diet or something like that.
Hmm.
And that's like, okay, well, what happens when it's like your partner's birthday? You're gonna have some of the cake.
Right.
You know, if when you have kids, are your kids going to be on this all carnivore, seed oil free, red dye 40 free diet,
Hmm.
or will you allow them to, like, enjoy some pizza from time to time, like, and
Right.
it kind of puts in perspective that, like, okay, food is not just there to be like geared towards health. It's meant to also be enjoyed. It's part of like what we do as like a as humans. Like, we celebrate together. It's like a centerpiece of a lot of social experiences. Again, I'm
Hmm.
living in Spain at the moment. Siesta and like their dinners and everything together. It's a big family event, and
Yeah.
at the same time, it's not just all about the food, but the food is a centerpiece of it, right? So I
Hmm.
think people have to kind of take a step back and kind of realize, okay, there's more to life than just health or how we look. Just
Hmm.
there's a lot to it that's kind of encompass actual overall health, because you have social health, emotional health, and these are
Yeah.
components too that we also have to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can end up neglecting those other areas of your life for so long because you're sort of putting them on hold until you have this ideal physique. You don't go out to eat, you don't take the trip, you don't go to the beach or whatever it is because you don't have the right body yet, or because it's not going to fit your macros. And surely there are seasons in our lives where some of us who are engaging in, a physique competition or getting ready for some other type of competition, or, we're going to run a half marathon through Death Valley or something. And yes, we go through life with our health habits and fitness habits with a fine tooth comb, and everything has to be very refined. And that's a matter of like a few weeks. But in the grand scheme, and even for people who are competitive, there are off seasons. And it's so important to intentionally reintegrate the other aspects of health to make sure that we're not so hyper focused on just physical that we don't even notice that we are losing contact with friends or that our mental health is suffering. And it can be hard to see the effects, I think, in part because it is so normalized. It's like, well, that's what it takes, no days off. You just have to be dedicated. Like, this is how we stay, this is how we're the best. We stay undefeated, we stay on top because, we don't take rest days and we never stop. And it's like, sometimes it is okay to take
Mm,
a rest day. Sometimes it's okay to stop pursuing a specific venture because it is no longer serving you and it's actually harmful to you. That doesn't mean that you've quit or given up or that you're a failure. It means that you have taken a step back and thoughtfully evaluated the state of your life and made decisions based not just on fear of what other people are going to think of you, or fear of weight gain, or fear of not eating the right macros. Like, that can become such a prison, such a myopic way of living when you're so afraid of any change or deviation in your schedule, when you stop doing the things that you used to enjoy doing because now you have to focus on, getting your 2 hours in the gym. I think the bodybuilders of old, I don't think had intended for people to integrate fitness into their lives in that way. I don't think that that was really the intention. Um, and where we probably see more of that influence is really coming from the parts of the industry that want people to feel fearful and anxious and dissatisfied because that's what keeps them being paying customers. Like, no, don't go out and eat with your friends, don't have other hobbies, like buy the stuff for the gym, buy the supplement, we want you to spend your money here.
mm. Yeah, I think with the comments on bodybuilders, I think like you see an increased level of like neuroticism among bodybuilders these days. I think it's because
Hmm.
things like tracking and like almost like there's been more scientific elements added to
Hmm.
bodybuilding kind of training programs, nutrition, so that it can become more data oriented and more precise. And like, I think
Hmm.
it gives the illusion that things are more precise, right? Because even in scientific studies, there's like standard deviations.
Yes.
There's not like a direct, like, like it has to be the 1.6 grams of protein. There's the range there, right? There's the kind of big
Yeah.
range, and even like the paper that like Eric published there like last year, like the range
Hmm.
is even like increased. So it's like,
Yes.
okay, here's a huge range here. Where do I exist now? And like one thing I will always kind of say to clients, especially the ones who are, they're not gearing towards like competing in a sport. I'll
Hmm.
frequently kind of relate to them what the minimum standards are for like kind of like maintaining where they are, or like
Yeah.
striving towards their goal, because I think quite often people get caught up in the concept of maximizing. If they're not
Hmm.
maximizing, they're falling short or they're missing out on some gains.
Yes.
And I think
Hmm.
like when it does come to like the maximizing element, it's like we're just doing this to be sure. Like we're just
Hmm.
trying to just cover all of our bases here, but we're not entirely sure if it's going to be much more benefit. Even on the
Right.
protein thing, right? Like I think, and I could be a bit off base here, but up to 1.6, you're going to get like the majority of benefits, right? And then as you get up to
Hmm.
2.2, you're pretty much covering all your bases. Up to
Right.
2.5, like you're really covering all your bases there, right? But it's like
Hmm.
between 2.2 to 2.5, like the amount of difference you're going to see across like 5 years is probably negligible, right?
Right.
And for the person who is general population, it's like, I don't want to be fucking salmon protein shakes all day. I don't want to be eating like
Hmm.
200 grams of meat at each meal. Like, yeah, then hit 1.6, or even, it doesn't have to be 1.6 like to the dot. If you're 1.5, do you think you're going to miss out on that much muscle growth? It's like, it's ensuring that people have these like minimum standards. How many days a week do I need to train to ensure that I'm still able to move towards my goal? It's a very
Hmm.
limited amount of training that you really need to do. How much activity you need to do on a daily basis? How much fiber do you need to eat? All these different things. Like, what are the kind of minimum behaviors I need to do versus the maximum? And then when you can strive for more, you can strive for more. But
Hmm.
on those days where your car breaks down, you're after losing your job or something like that, you know, you might kind of veer towards the minimum, or you might even just like not even meet the minimum. But you're able to be a little bit more
Yeah.
kind of, as you said at the start, self-aware enough to say, "Hey, this is only one day, this is only one week." In the grand scheme of all of my life, where I've kind of dedicated time towards like developing these healthy behaviors, then what impact is it really going to have in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, exactly. It's really, we talk about like not doing junk volume and, the minimum effective dose in terms of training, but we don't seem to apply that same thoughtfulness to other fitness related behaviors. And in those cases, it's like, maximize everything. Like, why can't people just track? Like, tracking is how you know exactly how much you're eating at all times. Not everyone really needs to know exactly how much they're
Yeah,
eating ever, let alone every day. So I I support stepping back and looking like what is the junk volume of fitness behaviors that I'm adding to my life? Like, am I taking 30 different supplements? Am I feeling anxious about, missing a meal? Am I going to the gym, even if it means that it's going to negatively affect my social life? Do I feel guilty when I don't go to the gym? Those things are not really returning on your energy investment and your emotional and mental investment. So it's about helping people establish more consistency and less strife. So, if you don't track, no, you're not going to know exactly how many grams of protein, whatnot you're eating. You can still reasonably eyeball portions because you've been tracking for many years, or you can go in with an awareness of hand-based portion size or plate planning, and then pay attention to your hunger and fullness signals. And in the meantime, address other habits like eating when you're bored or when you're lonely, or not going to the gym because you hate going to the gym, but then feeling guilty that you didn't go to the gym, when instead you could find another behavior, another physical activity that you do enjoy and do that instead. Like, you are allowed to enjoy yourself. You're allowed to enjoy your physical activity. You're allowed to enjoy your meals. There was this movement a few years ago toward eating like the blandest food possible, because then the idea was that you wouldn't want to eat more of it. No, you don't want to eat more of that food, but what you will end up doing is eating more of a different food that tastes better, which is what you wanted in the first place. And now you've eaten twice as much as you really needed, and you feel uncomfortably full, and you haven't hit your macros. The alternative to that is to provide yourself with a meal that is both tasty and satisfying, and then realizing that when you are no longer hungry, you can stop eating. And if you're hungry later, you can eat again. And it's the same when we apply that to foods that are seen as hyper palatable. You will eventually have to be around those foods. If you don't train yourself or find in some cases, an assistive device like a medication for some individuals, if you don't give yourself the tools and skills to be able to be around that food, you will repeat that same cycle when you're around that food in the future. So when it comes to, like I'm not anti macro tracking, but I'm
Mhm.
saying if someone can't stick to their macros anyway, saying, like you said, try harder, like, no, you need to use macros. That doesn't work. They have to be able to utilize a different system, a different set of skills that still supports their wellness goals and their overall health in a way that's actually consistent and sustainable for them. And macros are not it. A lot of people. That's just the reality.
Mm. Yeah, like for me, macros was like the first time I was able to understand nutrition. Like when I started
Hmm.
to track it, so naturally, when I started out, that was my bias, right? But
Yeah.
it was actually when I did precision nutrition that I was like going through like their behavioral like component
Hmm.
of their course, and I was like, huh, this stuff is definitely going against my bias, and I don't really agree with it
Hmm.
right now. But the more I
Yeah.
started to implement a lot of strategies with clients, like and even just some of like how practical some of the stuff was. Like you mentioned
Hmm.
the hand tracking portions there. Like hand tracking portion, it's not perfect, right? It's not
Right.
perfect like relative to you have weighing scales and you have like something like chronometer or macro factor and you get chicken breast, right? It's not
Hmm.
perfect like that. But for if you're in a situation where you're out at a restaurant and you're looking to quantify the amount of like the portion sizes on your plate,
Hmm.
it's perfect for that situation.
Yeah.
What's the alternative? Are you
Yes.
going to bring your weighing scales to it? No, because that would be fucking crazy. you know,
Hmm. Yeah.
or definitely not socially acceptable. So I think
Hmm.
as coaches, these are the types of things that we need to be kind of teaching our clients alongside like macro tracking
Hmm.
if we're using something like that, right? Like if I'm
Hmm.
being honest, I will initially get people to try macro tracking because if somebody
Hmm.
has if they have no experience with it, or yeah, if they have no experience with it, they're not really too familiar with like different types of foods, like or even what their portion size is or how much they're eating.
Hmm.
I'm going to use that just as the initial quantification method. But I'm always saying to
Yeah.
people, when you are logging your foods, pay attention to what is in each food. Look at your
Hmm.
proteins, look at the carbs, look at the fats. It's meant to
Yep.
be. It should be used as an active process, so that
Yep.
you're forming like a mental database of like what's in each food, so that
Yep.
when you go to an outside environment and you're able to use these hand portions, you can say, okay, this amount of protein is in that steak. Oh, there is also
Yes.
some fat like in it too. I need to account for that as well. And then over
Hmm.
time, the more you do this, you form like a mental database of all these foods, all these different meals, calories, so that you can eat in the outside environment without a nutrition app, or you don't need a nutrition app like unless you really, really need it to use it for a specific purpose. And like I think
Yeah.
that's like the big utility of it versus it becoming a
Hmm.
dependence. And I think it's becomes a
Yes.
dependence when it's used passively. When it's used, okay, I'm just gonna scan this barcode, trust whatever it says in the barcode, and just log it there, and just forget about it
Hmm.
later. And then the only way that they know how to kind of control their nutrition, control their body weight, is by using this app. And if they don't have it,
Hmm.
they can't do it. And then what happens when you don't have it, when it doesn't have a barcode, or you know
Right.
don't know how to input the food log or whatever it may be,
Hmm. Hmm.
shit hits the fan, and then that's the day where everything goes south. So
Yeah.
I think there has to be education about the coach's part on how to kind of help with these like non-tracking approaches, and but
Hmm.
then also for the user, it also just has to be like, how can I get the most from this practice right now, so I don't need to use it
Yeah.
later.
Yes. And I think that's the big difference that you pointed out there, because there have been studies that look at the effects of tracking. It's very context dependent. When you have a group of people who've never tracked before and they've never tried dieting before, and they're tracking just to learn what's in food, and they're not doing it in order to control or reduce their body weight, that is not linked to any increase in psychological distress or disordered eating risk. It's just an awareness of, oh, now I understand like these foods have more protein or these foods have more carbs and these have more fats. And so now I can build a balanced meal that's based on, my nutrition needs, but also stuff that I enjoy eating because it doesn't have to fit like a specific strict number of macros per meal. But when people are using it long term, like you said, they have a dependence on it and it becomes a compulsion. And that is the way that they feel safe eating, even if it's like, oh, flexible dieting, but it still is something that fits your macros. You don't feel safe just eating a donut because you're hungry and there's a donut available and it looks really good. And you're like, yes. And later I will eat something with vegetables and protein. And right now I'm going to eat a donut and it's fine. And I don't have to, you know, check in with my macro tracking app. I'm aware a donut is not a nutrient dense food. And like, that adding that level of common sense and trusting that clients have that level of common sense. But what happens with so many people is that they are not, there's the macros are given and it's like, this is what you're supposed to be following. And it's about using the macros, not necessarily about learning the food. And there's no off ramp. There's no plan for the future for how am I going to help my client stay in tune with their internal signals or use other skills when they're out and about, or if they want to go on vacation, or what's going to be the contingency plan for when my client comes to me and says, I can't, like, I keep failing, I keep falling off track on the weekends, I can't stick to these macros. In that case, then like the macros are not serving them anymore. And so I think the problem occurs when we shift from macros being like a short-term educational tool that we use to build on to this is the long-term, the way you're supposed to eat. And if you don't eat according to macros, then you're going to eat the wrong amount. You're just going to eat junk. You're going to gain a bunch of weight back and lose your physique. And really the data shows that that is not the case. Even in weight neutral approaches, even in people who have not necessarily tracked macros before, when a weight neutral approach is employed, dietary quality does not suffer, their health does not suffer, their exercise behaviors do not suffer. So I think that's where, like I said, I'm not anti macro tracking. It's just we have to be very, I think, more realistic and more honest with ourselves and with our clients about the pros and cons and have a more comprehensive system in place, like a better ecosystem in which we have macros as an option. And then we have all these other things too.
It, and also, I guess there's it's not just the nutrition component per se, like the actual food component per se, that also leads to people having these kind of successes with macro tracking or non macro tracking approaches. Like there's that lean habits study. I can't remember the name of the authors. You'd probably know what I'm talking about, where they had people like have like the flexible they had flexible group and they had like a restrictive group, and essentially the people who had more of the kind of flexible approach, which was just they had a more inclusive mindset in regards to what foods they have. They didn't have a set list which they were choosing foods from, and they also looked at like other components of like how they were eating speed, were they eating like without distractions, how frequently were they having their meals. So like there's so much that goes into being able to sustain the diet versus just the likes of like tracking your macros, because tracking macros is it's one layer. Quite like I've seen approaches where people are tracking macros but they're still failing because they're having 2 meals a day. One is at 9 a.m. in the morning and the next one's at like 9 p.m. in the evening time, right? There's no eating window to that. And one is a very, very small meal, like a 200 calorie snack, and the evening meal is gorging, and I guess that's one element of like the diet that kind of should be kind of nailed down like pretty early on, in my opinion. Is like a structure, having like some frequent bounds of eating, because that's typically when people end up having like the hardest time. It's like when they go too long without meals, and then all of a sudden they go past the point of when they were usually meant to take their lunch, just an hour or so, and then all of a sudden they're ravenous and they're just looking for what's the easiest option. It happens to me at times. Like I tried to keep like I would work for myself in my home. But even if I like go from having my usual lunch at 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., I'm like looking in the fridge, I'm like, I kind of need something else to go alongside this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the other factors that I think is overlooked when people are really fixated on macros and, eating according to the specific time. Sometimes there's like a specific time, like with the macro plan. And they forget or are not taught to still recognize that there are other factors that are going to influence your ability to eat an amount that is comfortable, to eat sort of a prudent, nutritious meal, and that's going to affect how you feel afterwards. And these are things that you can integrate into a weight neutral approach, like not tracking macros, but making sure that you're eating based on the physiology of digestion. Usually our stomachs are emptying between, it takes about 1 to 4 hours. Every about 4 to 5 hours, we're going to get signals of hunger. Our blood sugar is going to get low. We're going to have difficulty concentrating, fatigue, feelings of hunger. That's the case for a lot of people. For some people, they do need some more external structure because maybe they're taking a medication or there's something that makes it difficult for them to sense those internal signals. We can still say, hey, has it been 4 or 5 hours since your last meal? Or if it was less, was your last meal actually just a tiny little snack? If you're having difficulty concentrating and you're feeling irritable, that's a signal that it is time to eat. And then what's the next step? Then we decide what would make a nutritious, satisfying meal. Like, what are the tastes and textures that I'm in the mood for? What's an amount that, based on my previous history, based on my self-awareness, is going to leave me feeling satisfied but not overly full? What are the foods that I know are digesting well? If I'm going to train soon, I'm going to make different decisions than if I'm having my post-workout meal, just because of I'm thinking of it in terms of like a digestive standpoint. So there's so many other factors to consider. And when we just rely on macros and we forget that it's important to enjoy our meals, it's important to eat at regular intervals, even if that means that we're eating maybe more frequently than the macros would have had us eat because we're a little bit hungrier. And to tune in to while we're eating to determine, do I need to eat? Do I need to clear my plate? And that's another thing, was we often will habituate cleaning our plate when we're tracking macros because the meal is done when the plate's clean because those were all my macros. So we really forget all of the skills that are important for eating, in a more self-regulated way. And so it's understandable that people feel really apprehensive and anxious because they're like, well, I don't know. How am I going to know how much to eat and what to eat and whether I'm hungry or not? What if I eat too much? It's a new set of skills to learn. But at the same time, it's not like we're going in without any awareness. Like, when you go into the gym and you're using an RPE based approach, you're using autoregulation, and it says like, you're going to go for a heavy triple at an RPE of 8. You're not like, I have no idea what to put on the bar at all. You're like, I have done a heavy triple before. What was it last time? How am I feeling today? You put an estimated amount on the bar and then you check in and you say, was that an RPE 8? Did my soul leave my body? Was it actually a 6? And from there, you make corrections to the weight. And it's the same thing with this. Like, you are not completely unaware. You know the nutritional qualities of foods. You know what you've usually been plating for yourself. And you can practice tuning back into hunger and fullness, and practice building meals that are satisfying, and practice the skills of self-regulation so that if you're eating something that's amazingly delicious, or you have like chocolate or something in the house, that you don't eat so much of it that you're uncomfortable because you think you have to get rid of it. So it's an additional layer of skill, and it is more involved than, just counting calories or macros. And then there's like not having those foods in the house. But it really is, I think, more long-term, more valuable. It's worth the investment of doing that, so that, if you want to use macros going forward, then yeah, you can, because you also have a good relationship with their utility as a tool. And it's something you can do short term and then say, don't need that anymore. And then go back to your more internally self-regulated ways of eating.
Yeah, I think in Ireland, even the concept of cleaning your plate is not even related to macros, but related
Mm-hmm.
to our famine past, where we couldn't
Yes.
let any scraps go to waste. Um,
Same in the
but
States.
yeah, we brought up
Mm-hmm.
some very good points there, and like again, it comes back to the very first thing we talked about, which was awareness, right? And bringing awareness back to like that, like middle of the meal, end of the meal. Am I 80% full? Am I completely full? Am I getting to the point of over
Mm-hmm.
fullness?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to get to the point of over fullness and kind of the point of like being like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
do it every single meal or every single day. But sometimes if you're just like celebrating a big event or something like that, maybe the extra few
Mm-hmm.
slices of pizza are worth it, and maybe not so worth it the next day. But for most meals, it should be a case where we are kind of checking in. Like
Yeah.
if you don't have a specific direction for like a goal for like something like bodybuilding where you do kind of want to just ensure that eating
Hmm.
enough to support that goal, and same with likes of powerlifting, for example. But you're looking to again maintain your weight. You're looking to just kind of maintain your health. You don't
Hmm.
need to make yourself uncomfortably full to finish the plate of food that you're given. Right. One
Right.
great thing that my partner does is when we go out to eat, she will she'll like finish her meal and then she'll put a napkin on the plate so
Hmm.
that like she'll have her dirty napkin on the plate on the food, so that it's like
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to have the food now because I put my dirty napkin on it, and that's her like
Hmm.
kind of way. And she'll announce to me, she'll say I'm done. So it's almost like there's like accountability now because she's told me
Yeah.
that she's done. So like even something like that, like could be
Hmm.
helpful for somebody to practice with and see if that like helps. It may not be perfect. That's just the way that helps her. But I actually thought it was like quite a good approach. And when I asked her why she did it, I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
I agree that like those little skills of self-regulation that are internal make a huge difference because it does take practice, and it takes time building those skills. But you get to a place where the food noise is much quieter, where it becomes natural to say, "Oh, I'm full. I don't want any more," and you're not distracted by the food that's left over on the plate, or you're not, as I mentioned, eating every like the whole pack of Oreos or whatever it is because you don't want to have to deal with the mental effort of resisting eating those day after day. And when you can come at it from a place of, oh, I'll eat an Oreo if I feel like eating an Oreo, then sometimes you don't feel like eating Oreos. Sometimes it becomes less and less worth it to feel physically uncomfortable. So, if I like, my partner and I love pizza. And, like a few times a month we'll get pizza. And I know like I'll eat a couple pieces of pizza and then I'm like, oh, that's good. Like, if I want to
Yeah.
have a third one, okay, I'll have a third one. But, I'm not thinking about it so much. I'm not feeling guilty about it. I'm just eating until I feel comfortable. And I know I'm not going to feel crummy the next day. Like I have practice now. And the same thing with cookies, chocolate, peanut butter. There are just sometimes when I'm like, no, I just don't feel like it. And had I heard that from someone 5 years ago, like, how can you turn down chocolate? How can you just not feel like eating chocolate? I don't know, because I can eat it whenever I want. And right now, I just don't, the mood is not with me. And I don't feel obligated to eat it just because it's available. And these skills, these changes in behavior are some of the biggest differences between the outcomes of weight neutral and weight focused approaches. In terms of long term weight loss, out at 2 years post intervention, the same amount of weight is lost, almost nothing, because it was a weight neutral approach. Maybe no weight will be lost, whereas the other group lost weight and then regained it. So long term weight loss, very similar, equal in terms of like the real practical implications. When we look at changes in cardiometabolic risk factors, those improve in both groups. Dietary quality either doesn't change or improves in both groups. Engagement in physical activity either doesn't change or improves in both groups. People don't get unhealthier with a weight neutral approach. They don't stop exercising with a weight neutral approach. But the biggest difference that's been seen is that people who pursue these weight neutral approaches have a higher level of hunger regulation response. So they don't eat just because food is available. They don't eat because they need to get it out of the house. They're able to say, "Oh, I'm this hungry. I'm going to have this much food, and I'm going to stop eating." And so they have reductions in binge eating type behaviors. That can be seen also in weight neutral approaches, in weight focused approaches during those interventions. But in many of the weight focused interventions, we also see that there are similar aspects. Like there's a group support aspect, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, and so I am willing to bet that because those things are similar in terms of in some cases people have reduced eating disorder behaviors, that it's more likely because of those aspects that are shared between approaches, the social support, the focus on psychological health. And it's not that the weight loss resulted in those things. And it wasn't the focus on weight loss that resulted in those things. And the other difference that we see is that there can be more preoccupation, more weight and body preoccupation in a weight focused approach because, or more psychological distress in some cases, post diet during the weight suppression phase, because now there is a great deal of pressure to maintain that lost weight in the midst of the post weight loss changes, physiological changes that are increasing hunger and making it hard to maintain that weight. And we don't see that in the weight neutral approaches because there is no post weight loss physiological change. There is no post weight loss weight suppression because they haven't tracked any lost weight. They've only been focusing on the behavior changes, and those have led to positive outcomes. So I say if you can get the same positive outcomes from an approach that has fewer potential risks, that's the outcome that I opt for. Unless it's completely, like if a person's got to get on stage on, doing a physique show, that's not going to be a weight neutral approach. But for the vast majority of people, a weight neutral approach, at least for the majority of time, is going to be just as effective and less potentially harmful than being focused on weight.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I've seen it like with people I've worked with, right? In the context of, I guess the probably the most common goal people have when they sign up for coaching is they want to lose body fat, and
Mm-hmm.
not everybody needs to lose body fat or needs to lose weight. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
case of that is just what is to be the goal that they expect to do if they're going to sign up with a
Mm-hmm.
coach, right?
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people are just not really in a position to lose weight from a behavioral point of view, and then some people just don't need to. Like some people
Right.
like could just do it, like actually just like building more muscle mass. But if you're just to stick with like a weight neutral approach, the benefits that somebody's going to get from just improving their overall habits, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
that's improving the sleep schedule, whether that's improving their ability to cope with stress, like having healthy coping mechanisms there, whether that's just like
Mm-hmm.
moving towards having an overall more healthful diet, right? The amount of
Right.
benefits that they'll get, not just physically, but like mentally, how they'll feel about themselves, and see this all the time where like you get somebody to focus on something like this, and all of a sudden the weight loss goal, it's like not even something they even really think about anymore,
Yep.
because so many people, they'll say I want to lose body fat or want to lose weight because I want to improve my confidence or whatever like that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so much of confidence is like related to like our self efficacy and like how in
Mm-hmm.
control of our lives we feel, and how that is like kind of good, and how in like how we are acting in line with like our general values. And if
Mm-hmm.
we kind of consider ourselves to be like a healthy person, but we're not kind of engaging in these healthful practices, and then we also think that, okay, to be healthy I need to lose weight, but then also you start eating more vegetables, eating more fruit, you're drinking more water, you're getting good sleep, you're feeling good, you're feeling benefits. You're like, oh, I'm actually capable of doing all these things. I haven't like really kind of changed
Yes.
my body composition, but I feel amazing. I feel confident. I
Yep.
feel like I'm actually capable. And I think so much of that is just tied to behaviors versus the look, because we all know people who have lost body weight, or people who are amazing, like have amazing physiques, but they hate how they
Mm-hmm.
look, right? They look in the mirror and they
Yep.
don't see what's like reflected back to them.
Yep.
So if that can exist where somebody is amazingly jacked and somebody look at them and be like, I wish I could look like that, but they hate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The same could be in reverse, right? The person who is in a bigger
Yes.
body can be completely like at peace, content with how they look, and how that makes them
Yes.
feel in their confidence. It's just like they're just opposites. But one, somebody sees from an outside perspective and says, I want that. I definitely don't
Mm-hmm.
want that. But if
Yeah.
they could see what's inside, they'd be like, yeah, I think I'll choose the other one that's maybe not as
Yeah.
societally kind of like aesthetic or whatever.
I'm so glad you brought that up because there are so many misconceptions around weight loss and body image. And while we do see improvements in people with overweight or obesity who go through one of these behavioral weight loss interventions, we do see a reduction in body dissatisfaction. So they dislike their body less. And a lot of times, logically, people will say, oh, well, then their body image has improved. It's not the same thing because what happens when that person regains the weight? Are they then going to go back to their baseline level of body dissatisfaction? in that case, they haven't actually increased other factors that are super important, like body appreciation or body image flexibility. They have just started to conform more to society's standards. And so they like their appearance more. But I think most of us want to empower our clients with a sense of confidence and body appreciation and respect and satisfaction that is not contingent on appearance. And so when we utilize the weight neutral approaches, that's another big difference that we see is that we do see increases in body appreciation and body image flexibility because those are built into those programs. And people stop monitoring their body weight and their body size. They stop trying to control it. And instead, they really are sincerely focused on the things that help them feel good and appreciating what their body can do. Whereas folks in a weight focused group can certainly also engage in those things, but there is a risk that the way that they feel about themselves afterwards is contingent on whether or not their body changed. Because how many times have we seen, like, I've seen this with clients or people, that I've had discovery calls with that are like, they're doing all of the things. They're already engaging in all of the healthy behaviors. They don't have extra weight to lose, really. Their body fat is already low. The problem for them is that they don't look the way they're supposed to look. And even if they reduce their body fat, they still are not going to like the way they look, at least not long term. In the vast majority of cases, that body dissatisfaction is like is like pneumonia. Like it goes away for a little bit and then, comes back. It's this lingering cough. And people continue to set the bar higher and higher and keep thinking, I've got to be leaner. It's like just my physique that's the problem. And no, it's that body dissatisfaction was never addressed. And so they can get all of the physical health benefits of that of a weight focused approach, but they still have this problem of this fixation on, oh, but my body was supposed to change. I was supposed to lose weight. Somehow I have failed, even though I've done all the things. We're in the weight neutral group, it's you did all the things. And that was the point, was the doing the things. And
Yeah.
so you have succeeded in doing the things. And, so the body image work, it is difficult to ensure that a person's body image improvements are really coming from a place of increased body appreciation and body image flexibility when you are also helping them to change their body so that they like the way it looks. Really, the only litmus test for that is then, well, how are they going to feel when they regain the weight? And then if they feel crummy again, then we know it was that they were actually conforming to societal standards rather than really building a sense of self-worth and appreciation that is not contingent on their appearance.
The distinction there between body dissatisfaction and then, actually, being at peace with your body is such an important distinction there. And I guess, as you're saying, like it is basically the difference between being like process driven and outcome driven, because that person who's just trying to just keep that body dissatisfaction lower, they're like eating their meals, they're getting their steps in, they're eating healthy because this is going to keep me from like going the opposite way. This is going to keep me looking the way I am. And that's not really a nice place to be, because you do these things every single day, and if every time that the motivation for it is almost coming from a place of shame and of guilt or of fear, that's not really a place that you want to live long term, right? It's like if you can get to a place where you're like, I like going to the gym and training hard because it feels fucking good. I like how like lifting heavy weights makes you feel, whatever it may be. I appreciate that this fruit and vegetables is going to help with my digestion. It's going to give me great micronutrients. It's going to help with my skin, energy, all these kind of different things. You can see like the other benefits, like what is this habit behavior give me beyond the physical benefit? Because at some stage we're all going to become old saggy bags, and there's nothing we can do about it,
Yes.
And like no matter how much you try to like kind of reverse aging, you're gonna get old, So unless you want to become like, I don't know, get like he's a plastic surgery, and then it's like it's become that kind of caricature of like, oh, what's going on with this person here, So at some point, you have
It's
to
like,
cross that bridge.
right, exactly. And I want to arrive there and help people arrive there at a place of acceptance and appreciation. Like, oh, I've had the pleasure of growing old. Great. Like I made it this far. That was not easy. Like, thanks, body, for, waking up another day rather than from a place of fear, anxiety, distress, or like grief that I'm losing, my appearance, I'm losing my younger self, but from a place of, I'm still a person that I feel proud of. I still like myself as an individual. I still make decisions that I feel good about. And this this mental part of me is just being carried around in this body. And I'm taking care of this body so that it can carry me around for a longer period of time. Yeah, I go to the gym because I like going to the gym. And I eat the way that I eat, which is nutrient dense, because I want to take care of my body and because it feels good. And I also, the meals taste good. I'm not eating stuff that I'm like, oh, this is so bland. Like, I hate kale. I don't eat kale. I know it's nutritious. I'm not going to eat it. So like I'm enjoying myself, along the way. And that's what I see in my clients is that they're like, oh wow, I actually didn't stop going to the gym. I didn't just eat cake all day. I realized that I like going to the gym when I do it on my terms. I like eating nutritious foods when I do it on my terms. And so it's that shift from, like you say, from a place of that shame and fear and anxiety, that place of trying to avoid going back to the way you were because that person was terrible. And then the internalization that if I'm, eating the right foods, I'm going to the gym, that means that I'm a good person. Like that can be so harmful, even though, yes, going to the gym consistently can be a sign that you are dedicated, like, that you can follow through on the things that you said you were going to do. It can also be a sign that maybe you're not actually like that unless you're motivated by fear and anxiety. And not to knock that if that's you, but just to be aware of your real motivations. If you find that your lifestyle is exhausting, that's a sign that it's not really being driven by your values. The way that you're doing it is not really driven by your values. It's not energizing you. You're just constantly in this race against the prior version of yourself. And you can't appreciate, who you are now because you're constantly in search of making sure that you're better. And that's an exhausting. I've lived like that. I was like that for the majority of my time in fitness. Like I started tracking macros when I was 18, and from 30 to 33, I struggled to stop. It really took me years to stop because I had been operating from a place of fear and anxiety. And for a while, my gym habits, when I moved, I didn't have an in-home gym. They did get less consistent because now I was like, oh, I'm not powered by anxiety and fear. Like I'm good with my body. And like if my body changes a little bit in this moment because I have more work to do or because I'm sick or there's other stuff that in my life that I have to deal with, it is what it is. When in the next season, when I can go to the gym more consistently, I'll go to the gym more consistently. But there was sort of a distress to that of like, oh my gosh, but like, am I going to lose these habits? No, you just shift from a place of where you were operating to figuring out what your version of this lifestyle actually looks and feels like.
Mm. Yeah, it's starting to try to accept, I guess, that you are a finite human being that can do only
Mm-hmm.
so much stuff in a given day, in a given period of time. And,
Yeah.
as we kind of mentioned earlier, there's only so much stuff you can optimize at a given time, and sometimes life is going
Yeah.
to pull you in the direction of more work. That is probably not the best time to sign up for a competition. Starting
Mm-hmm.
a family, probably not the best time to sign up for a competition. It's
Yes.
probably not the best time to be like, "Oh, I'm going to get really dialed in my sleep habits when I'm expecting this baby. you know.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So I
Being
think
being
yeah,
honest with yourself.
yeah, massively so, and I think this is what is so hard for people to accept. It's because of the messaging, social media. You have, it seems like every other week we have like a new supplement coming out, some new bullshit product coming out that like people are like, I need to add that in to be truly healthy. I need to add this
Yeah.
thing into my day. Or like, I'm sure you've seen that the meme morning routine from that guy, Ashton Hall.
Yes.
Yeah. So like people are like, oh, my morning routine doesn't look like that. I'm sure
Hmm.
nobody's looking at that and be like, okay, that's generally something I need to do. But there's got to be
Right.
some people who are like, I don't have the time to do all this type of stuff, and just because I don't have the time to do these certain behaviors, I'm not going to start. And it's like, if you can do one thing today that's going to improve
Mhm.
your health or improve the trajectory, that's the worthwhile behavior to do.
Mhm.
Again, coming back to that, what's the minimum thing, minimum effort that you need to do for nutrition, for your
Mhm.
sleep, for your stress management, for whatever it is today to move forward? Because realistically, like a lot of the messaging that we are going to see in social media, it's always the extreme. You're never seeing the
Yes.
average Joe living his average Joe day, completely fine with his life, completely fine with his job. Like, he's not hustling there to become like, a millionaire and make, 200 grand a week or something like that. Like, he's just like, content with life, but we're not going to mess
Yes.
with that. And there's plenty of
Yeah.
people who are like that, who are now
Mhm.
like living life thinking that they need to be chasing something else.
Yeah.
They could be perfectly fine with like their job, and then they're like, oh, I see this guy that I follow on Instagram and he's doing much better and he's 10 years younger than me. I should be chasing
Mhm.
something like that. Or it could be a case of the physique, right? It's like, oh, like, again, I'm 31 now. I'm hardly like a dinosaur, but like, I'm seeing these young 20-year-olds coming up who are much stronger than I was when I was 20 and much more jacked because
Mhm.
they got started earlier. They probably better access to information than I did when I started. And yeah, they probably
Yeah.
could just have better genetics, right? So, and then I see them like, oh, maybe I should be doing what they're doing, and not taking everything
Mhm.
else into context. And that's
Yeah.
me, who's has enough kind of skin in the game and experience here to be able to recognize all the underlying factors. But you have somebody else who's not in a position to kind of chase it at all, and they're getting guilted
Mhm.
because they're like, I can't do my 6 days push pull leg split with 40 sets per muscle group per week. you know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It really has become an environment in which like our basic needs are seen as luxuries. I commented something to the effect of like this has been one of capitalism's greatest successes, that it has been able to convince the masses that their basic human needs are luxuries that need to be earned by making someone else really wealthy. So when we say, I don't actually want to hustle all the time, I want to rest. I want to sit on my porch and drink tea. I want to spend time with my friends. I don't want to go to the gym 6 days a week. I want to eat a piece of cake while I'm reading a book. Oh, and like those things are seen as just extraneous and not the important parts of a fulfilling life that they actually are. Because it's like, well, you can only do those fun things after you have, worked your 9 to 5 or your 9 to 7 and are making at least 6 figures a year, and you have the six pack and the car, and you've optimized your diet and you got into the gym. Once you've done all of that, then you're allowed to have a hobby. Then you're allowed to rest. And so, of course, like, that becomes it when you see people that look so successful and we are prone to comparing ourselves to them, then yeah, we get a sense of like guilt, like, oh, am I just settling for this shitty life that I have? When really, yesterday you were fine with your life. Today you saw this guy with his Maserati or something, and now you're second guessing all of your choices. That is also a distressing way to live, because like you've lost track with like, well, what are your values? What's important to you? Why are you trying to live according to this person's narrative? Like, you don't know what their real story was and if it applies to you. And also, you're not that person. You could have your own version of a fantastic life, and maybe that's a cabin in the woods and 16 cats, and like that's fine. That was what you want. So yeah, I was definitely a part of that hustle culture. Definitely, I never said no to anything. I worked 7 days a week. I was afraid to take a day off. I was afraid to take a rest day from the gym. I was afraid to stop tracking because I'm like, I'm not allowed to just exist. I'm not allowed to just be a human being and like relax and do enjoyable things and sometimes do nothing. And yeah, it was exhausting. And thankfully, I don't live like that.
Yeah, I think it can often be a common case of like the grass is always greener, because
Hmm.
you see people who, again, social media is just a great way to kind of conceptualize this, because you see people with either, as you said, the Maserati or like, the amazing physique. And it's
Hmm.
like, if we were honestly asked to trade lives right now, would we do that? You know, would you give up
Right.
everything in your day to day life right now to do everything they do? Because, you know, especially because we're marketed extremes, there is going to
Hmm.
be a lot of things in that person's day to day that maybe get them where they are that you wouldn't want to do at all. Like, you know, you wouldn't even
Right.
want to like stand for a second. But then there's
Hmm.
also that. It's like, well, you don't know what the motivating factor for them getting to that position is as well, right? So like, you
Yeah.
know, naturally there's going to be people who there's varying degrees of how people build success. It could be inherited. It could be
Hmm.
the person who was like, I'm gonna show them. They came up from nothing. That kind of thing. There's
Sure.
that
Yep.
type of story permeates everything, and the same thing with like the likes of from a physique point of view, there's people who are going to be genetically blessed, and like, you know, they just did whatever,
Yeah.
and got jacked. You know, they probably don't have like a great, they don't probably don't have great habits or anything like that, but they just like get where they
Hmm.
are. And then you have people who, you know, they grind themselves into dust to get where they have been, and you have people
Hmm.
who have again gotten to where they are because they hate their body and they'll never feel as if it's enough, even though they've achieved great things, right? And then it's like
Yeah.
it just that's what social media doesn't capture. So it doesn't capture the motivation behind why a person is where they are right now. So I think
Hmm.
it's very easy to be like, I want what that person has, but unless you kind of know the full story as to how they got there, it's like maybe not so. Maybe we do have to kind of take stock and, as you said, kind of like what's been our what how has our journey been? How have we kind of progressed
Hmm.
from where we started to where we are now? How content are we with our day to day life? If we're not
Hmm.
terribly content with what we're doing right now, what do we think is like the biggest pain point in our life right now that we could potentially change? Right, like one exercise I remember
Yeah.
getting years ago from a mentor that I had was, you know, whatever your goal is, like we need to kind of discover like what type of behaviors are going to relate to that goal, right? Now,
Hmm.
based off what your current day is like, what does your current day look like, right? Like hour by hour, what you're doing, and how does that reflect with the behaviors that you need to do to kind of achieve that goal? And then what would
Right.
your ideal day be like? What would like your
Hmm.
ideal day be like in terms of like if you could do whatever you wanted, and how many of those behaviors now translate over to that day? Okay,
Hmm.
because then that's going to be the thing that you're more likely to sustain over the long term. Because for some
Yep.
people, sticking to all the X's and O's of optimal physique development, optimal performance, optimal health, it just won't be worth it, and it won't be compatible with where they are in their life. You know, whether
Hmm.
that's you work for yourself or you are working for a company and you have a lot of stresses there, you have family, kids, you are part of like your wider community in terms of like social groups and stuff like that. You know, again, you could be very, very much stretched in, and then that comes again back to the point of we need to accept what the limits of our progression over the long term can be, or where we could potentially get. And again, just something that people struggle with, but it's worth kind of taking a step back and, you know, getting a journal, kind of mapping out all this type of stuff, and, you know, again, just becoming, as you said, very, very start of the podcast, becoming a little bit more self aware and in tune with like where
Hmm.
we can be and where we want to be.
That's absolutely it. Yeah. Just getting to know ourselves better. We can navigate life better when we really know ourselves and we feel more confident in our decisions and we realize what's actually important to us and how we want to live versus what we thought we should be doing based on what we see as the status quo.
Gabby, I feel like I've kept you here for uh, plenty long.
I appreciate you having me. This was a fantastic conversation. If people want to reach out to me, they can find me on Instagram at Trust and Nourish. It's trust underscore and underscore nourish. And I do have free resources both for coaches and for non coaches that can help them sort of on their journey transitioning away from macros. And I do also put on a newsletter. And I've got sneak peeks for my book. So my book, the working title is called Beyond the Scale, a comprehensive approach to health and wellness coaching. That might change to something about like authentic wellness in a weight obsessed world. But it does cover a lot of what we've talked about, you know, the history of diet culture and the formation of these beauty and fitness and health standards, and then how coaches can work in a weight neutral framework, as well as working in a weight focused framework, but with a risk mitigation approach. Um, and the skills that are going to be helpful for their clients in terms of transition away from macros, and also for them as well to maybe shift their perspective on their role as a coach when they're not guiding someone toward physique change.
So I'm sure that type of resource will do a lot of listeners a lot of help. So yeah, if you have been enjoying the episode, make sure that you do head over and check that out. When will that book be released?
It was released, it was planned for
Oh,
March of next year, but I am ahead of schedule, like because this has been so fun to write. So could be a little bit earlier, could be maybe January.
okay, unreal, unreal. So yeah, look, Gabby, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it myself. But yeah, you at home, the listener, if you have enjoyed this podcast, make sure to give it a rating, review the podcast platform that you're listening on, and yeah, go over to Gabby's socials, give her a follow, and yeah, we will catch you in the next one.